Let me first welcome Sunita Soli and Mrs. Malika Ramanujan, who have come all the way from New Delhi to advise and help us proceed with our work. We have Mr. Ramesh Chandra Panda, the Special Secretary to Education of the Government of Tamil Nadu. We could not think of a better person to preside this evening, because this is something connected with education, and with his help, we hope we'll go forward very fast. We have on stage with us Mrs. Sublakshmi of Ramakrishna Mission High School, who wants to start a center in that school. We also have among the audience today Ms. Gopalakrishnan of the Bharati Vidya Bhavan, where the center has already been set up and will start functioning from the new academic year. This is our first public meeting of Madras Dyslexia Association. The objectives, those of you who do not know what dyslexia is, would have found in the handout given to you what it is all about. At least the basic idea is given there. If you turn to the last page, it's there, the objectives of association. To put it simply, it's to help the children who have this problem, the normal, intelligent children who seem to have some problem and unable to achieve in class, to get them back into the mainstream, as we call it. Dr. Sodhi, this evening, you see, among one of the objectives is to start centers in every normal school. We believe that having special classes outside the normal schools is not going to help the children much. Unlike children with learning problems caused by other medical or whatever reason, the dyslexic children are very normally intelligent children, unable to achieve. So such children need to be with the normal stream schools, and starting off centers in every normal school is going to help them a lot, and we are going to see a lot of children happier after that. Dr. Sodhi has a lot of experience in setting up centers in New Delhi. She's been doing wonderful work over there, together with Mrs. Ramachandran, who is the founder of the trust, which does all that work over there. There are many teachers among you here who may have come across children in your class. With all your experience, you are unable to get through to them and they are not doing well. And you keep wondering why. It's almost a challenge to you. And fair enough, some of them, when they cannot, who are not aware of this problem called dyslexia, may exist or does exist, they tend to brand the children as stupid. Well, you can't blame the teachers also, because maybe they're not aware of that. The reason being, the children look normal, behave very intelligently otherwise. There's no visible sign externally. So you say, I mean, what's wrong with that child? Why is she looking out of the window? Why is he disturbing the other children? Whatever. And call them, label them for stupid, lazy, troublesome, dreamer. And this is where a little bit of awareness in this, and with proper guidance from experts like Dr. Sodhi, we are going to achieve a lot. The response so far from the two schools that we have met has been wonderful, just touching. We didn't expect so much to happen so fast. Now our problem seems to be how to train teachers so fast. Somewhere along the line, in reading, I came across an explanation or a definition, as you may call it, of this problem, where it says a difference in a child's potential for learning is obvious when you see them. In an experienced teacher can look at a child and say, well, he or she is an intelligent child. So difference in a child's potential for learning and what the child actually learns, which causes the school problems, in the achievement problems. This is what's the sad side of it. What he can actually learn, the potential he has is different from what he actually learns. So if these centers, with the proper help and guide, can help those children come back, I think that's going to be wonderful. And talking to Dr. Sodhi in the last few hours that she's been here, somebody asked her, what sort of qualification do you need for a teacher? Dedication and motivation. So here's some hope. We don't need to know a lot about education or BA. I'm not saying that it's not good. So there is scope, so we don't have to look far for teachers. She's talking about the experience of her training very normal, average people from offices even. She spoke about somebody whom she has trained who has no teacher training background at all. That's where the hope comes in. The past few years, Madras Dyslexia Association was formed in 1990, August, when we had a lady from London who had come down to conduct a workshop here. She mooted that idea, saying it's not enough to teach little children here, have an association and start spreading the awareness. 1990. So with this slight introduction that I've given you, with a lot of hope, we take off today. Our first public meeting, as I said, with 2 schools already supporting us. We hope more schools and principals and teachers will come forward. And Madras Dyslexia Association is there to support such causes. We'll help train teachers, technical know-how, literature maybe from wherever it's available, we'll trace, and it'll be there ready for you. Thank you very much.
Master Siddharth will present the bouquet to Mr. Panda. Anisha will now present a bouquet to Mrs. Malika Ramchandran. I'd like to say a few words about Mr. Ramesh Chandra Panda, Special Secretary Education. Actually, I want to tell the people gathered here today that when we went to invite him, he was so receptive to being the chief guest here today, to give us a keynote address for this function. He first asked us, what can the government do for you? We will help you in all ways to set up centers or to train teachers either by funds or by special curriculums. They're already doing it in so many different ways, and he would help us in this. I think Madras Dyslexia Association couldn't have asked for anything more. Now Mr. Panda will give us a keynote address and tell us how much the government can help us with this.
What it means, how a child really suffers from dyslexia, what are its impacts. Except that I know there are great men who have been dyslexia in their childhood days, like Winston Churchill or Edison, etc. They have overcome and they have become the high achievers. Therefore, first of all, I thought I should come and get myself fully educated as to what is dyslexia from Dr. Sodhi's address to all of us and talk to all of us. Like many of you also, I would request if Dr. Sodhi could also circulate after the talk or nice advice in a written form which will be very much useful to the parents as well as to the education administrators like us. I would say that the Madras Association of Dyslexia has been only very, very young, and so many eager, anticipating parents are there to know what type of disorder the children suffer in the educational scenario for which they are not high achievers in the earlier stage. As Mr. Ramanujam was pointing out, the disorder can be defined as a gap between the potentiality and the attainment. So this is only found from the parents' ability to know that the child is not able to achieve, but he has a very high degree of potentiality. Therefore, the awareness of the child's dyslexia disorder is very much necessary for the parents to know at the initial stages. I would say that some of the well-placed people come up to us saying that, "Sir, would you kindly recommend my child to Padma Seshadri for an admission?" Some of the parents come forward and say, "Would you kindly, sir, recommend my child to SBOA, not to be sent out?" Two of such cases which I came across very recently, I can only correlate their requests of not to be sent out from two different private schools was mainly due to the dyslexia disorders, because one was not in a position to pick up and cope up in the writing, though was very good in his oratorical things. The other child was very good in writing, but his speech and his speaking abilities were not to a large extent good. These disorders in speaking or in writing or reading are, as I understand, are the dyslexia disorders, and which can be overcome. We come across this so often, and when we speak to the principals, what they say that, "Look here, this child is not able to pick up where the question for us. We don't want anything less than distinction in our classes. All should have distinction in our classes. Then only, you see, we must so record that 1992 examinations, 100% pass with distinction." So this child, when he is there, they say that no, he will not complete he is a good, brilliant boy, we will understand. But his writing ability is such, the same thing he will write not in 2 hours or 3 hours, but in 5 hours. We won't permit such child. He may be brilliant. Similarly, the others would say that yes, he knows everything, but when it comes to the practical, you say, let us say if it is a science, in physics or chemistry or biology, no, the child is not speaking anything. He is able to do all practicals, so there he will lose marks. The reluctance of the principals and teachers are more often to really integrate such child to the normal school curriculum and scenario. Therefore, I would suggest Dr. Soti to tell us, I mean specifically I will be more interested, in what ways really government should come forward, not alone to give, as Mrs. Srinivasan just told us, the type of financial assistance or aid. Financial assistance or aid would be coming either from the government or from non-government organizations. But what type of curriculum, what type of educational adjustments or modifications required in order to cope up the normal curriculum and normal examination system for such types of children? Because we have given, let us say, some of the physical disabled and disordered children certain exemptions and certain qualifications for not writing even the second language. You see, for example, a child coming and is not in a position to pick up 2 languages at a time. We have given specific exemption for such children that they need not write the second language. They can write the only language in which he or she is proficient to write. Similarly, are we to really adopt a method of curriculum and examination reform by which such dyslexia children can be integrated to our normal system? Because they are part and parcel of the normal society, and we should try to see that they develop themselves. Here are two aspects I should only insist. One is awareness of the parents that their child is suffering from such a disorder. Second thing, the teachers should be equally aware and see that such children are brought forward for a better active course, and these teachers should be given proper training. What type of training should be given? Maybe the association would be in a position to take up, and from the government I can certainly assure association president, members and the office bearers that government will come forward to assist such steps to train teachers, the schools who are going to conduct such things. These assistance will be not only for financial nature, but any other methods. If you feel that the books and syllabi need to be changed for such types of children, we can certainly also look into, because our educational system must cope up with the needs of the society. As I understand from the brochure issued by the Madras Dyslexia Association, in India we have about 10% of children suffering. 10% of children suffering from such disorder, compared to 1.5% in USA and about 8% all over the world. So we are much higher compared to the world averages. That means we have to do, we have to take lot more steps and efforts to see that these children come up in the normal standards. Actually, this is a disorder, it's not a disease. Dyslexia, I understand, is not a disease, it's only a disorder. If it's a disorder, it can be corrected. There are corrections are there. You see the plastic surgery changes your facial complexion completely. It makes an ugly girl to a beautiful girl. There are so many types of medical systems which have been developed to make all disorders corrected. And I feel with the fund cooperation and hope from both parents and teachers, with whatever possible government support you need from the association, we will certainly try to see that all such dyslexia children come up and achieve their full potential in their future life. And I must really congratulate Mr. Ramanujam and Mrs. Srinivasan. They have been the guiding force for this association to organize. This is a maiden attempt to have such a public meeting. And response from the parents has been overwhelmingly good. And they would certainly go from strength to strength and see that the association brings together all parents. My small advice to the parents is that the people who suffer from blindness, night blindness, not the blindness as such, but night blindness, what they do not reveal it to anybody. They will only keep it to themselves. And it will be only known to some of the relations, and they won't like to correct themselves. I was really surprised to see one of our colleagues, Mr. Bhatikar, who is now chairman of Paradip Port Trust, the Goa Port Trust. He was from Madras cadre, so he was suffering himself from the such night blindness. You see, he organized an association here to see that the night blindness cannot be fully cured, but at least it can be corrected to such an extent that your night vision can be better. So here the question of the cooperation from self, and specifically for dyslexia children, it should come from the parents, that you must recognize that your child is suffering from dyslexia. And if you do not try to bring the child to your corrective steps, it will be too late for you to really explore the potentialities of children in the future years. Therefore, it should be the responsibility of the parents to come forward, mix with the association representatives to try to learn, cooperate, and bring up your child suffering from such disorder, so that he becomes really a full citizen and achieves his full potentiality in his future life. With these few words, I again thank the organizers of this meeting, specifically President of Madras Dyslexia Association, Mr. Ramanujan, and Mrs. Srinivasan, who have been guiding force for bringing all of you together to listen to a very nice and educative talk from Dr. Sunita Sodhi. Thank you.
In 1990, Dr. Sunita Sodhi went to the dyslexic clinic at St. Bartholomew's Hospital in Yan, as it is aptly named, was founded in 1987 as a non-profit organization to work in the study and treatment of dyslexia.
To ask Mrs. Sodhi after her talk, we would ask you to just write down the question along with your name and address. If you're not able to give you the answer straight away, we'll make sure we mail it to you. Thank you. Dr. Mrs. Sunita Sodhi.
Mr. Pandey, Mr. Ramanujan, Mr. Lakshmi, and Mrs. Ramachandran, and all of you who have gathered here today, I thank you for being here. I consider it a great honor that I've been invited by the Madras Dyslexia Association to deliver this talk for you. We were pleasantly surprised to know from them that they have such a strong backbone now, and that they have been able to do a lot of work for dyslexics in the state of Tamil Nadu. I would like to share with you first of all why I consider it such a great honor. This is my birthplace. I was born here several years ago, and I'm coming back now after so many years to deal with a topic that has been a matter of concern for many, many years. I would like to begin by saying that a lot has been said about dyslexia, a lot has been said, what is dyslexia? You all have read something about it, a lot of you are parents here too. But I would like to share this with you, that even before we coined the term learning disabilities, even before we coined the term dyslexia, there were children, there were humans, there were people in many parts of the world who weren't learning, who weren't coping with what was happening in school. The only thing was we didn't know about it. We only knew about it when we made a name for it. We coined a name for it. And when we coined a name for it, people said, don't coin a name for it. The biggest resistance we faced from people, from principals, from schools when we spoke was don't use names for children. I'm sharing this for you because it's very strong. This theory about not labeling children, not having stigma for it. And Mr. Pandey very nicely talked about this. My own feeling and our feeling over the years has been that if you don't call it a name, others will. And not only will they call it worse names, but the child is made to feel really inferior about it, develops a great deal of inferiority complex. And to tell you how far we have advanced from that first stage when we were told not to label children, not to use stigma for children, was the other day when I had a child come up to my clinic, and the child was moderately intellectually disabled. In other words, the term normally used is mental retardation. The parent wanted desperately for me to say that the child was dyslexic. He would rather that the child was dyslexic than intellectually disabled, because now the connotations was clear. You are intelligent, you are bright, you can function, provided that we in society give appropriate help for it. And this is where our fight must begin and has to begin. I would like to share a quotation with you which I found very interesting. It's a Darwinian quotation which says that if the misery of dyslexics be caused not by their nature but by our institution, great is our sin. In other words, the misery that children are having or are facing in school have been made by us. They didn't create it, they didn't cause it, they didn't discover it. They were born with some problem and we aggravated it. And if we don't do something about it today, we are at great fault. And more so now, when we know that there is technology, there is educational strategy which tells us what to do for these children, and we remain in ignorance. That's the biggest fault that we could have. How can we as parents, as educationists, as people who are academicians, continue to live in ignorance in this day and age. When I was working with juvenile offenders many years ago, I found that a large number of them couldn't read. And that was the first inkling to me that something along the line wasn't quite correct. I now know, and research now tells us, that large percentages of criminal offenders are dyslexic, large numbers of them. When research was done with them and they provided education for them, a lot of people who are working with dyslexia in America now go into jails and go into criminal institutions to educate these criminal offenders. They found that the rate of recidivism reduced from about 47% to 14.7% in one district that they had done this. So then they said that one of the ways to solve this problem was to educate the offenders, not to incarcerate them. And that's where I made a switch or changed over from working with juvenile offenders to children. It was just by chance. I didn't have a degree in learning disabilities. I still don't. I don't have a formal degree in learning disabilities, and I'm proud to say to you that I don't. It takes, they say, 10 years to become an expert in any area, whether you're a doctor or whether you're a lawyer or whatever you are. Well, I guess that's why I'm being called an expert, because it was exactly 10 years ago that I started working in this field. And the other answer is that somebody asked me, how long does it take for children to overcome this problem? I would say to you again, maybe 10 years for them to become expert. After all, they also have a problem and they have to become expert in reading or spelling or writing. So the answer is not so simple. I would like to share with you, very basically, to come back to the point, what is dyslexia? Now, all over the world, they use the term dyslexia in different connotations. Some countries use the word learning disabilities, others use the word specific learning difficulties, and yet others developmental dyslexia and all kinds of other terminology. We in India prefer to use the word dyslexia for the simple reason that learning disabilities had already been associated and clubbed together with children who were slow learners along with the dyslexics. So we wanted to differentiate between these two groups of children. The reason being that many a times children who have moderate intellectual disabilities cannot cope with general school life, whereas the dyslexic can. Our aim was therefore to work with children who were going to regular schools and required help therein. Therefore, we set up an association solely for this purpose and felt more comfortable with the use of this term than we did with the other terms, and so we stayed with it. We recently had an Australian who visited us, an expert from Victoria College, who told us that they too had used the term learning disabilities and now feel better using the word dyslexia. Now, the reason being that when we talk of dyslexia, a general layman's term of what it is an unexplained difficulty in learning to read, write, and spell. When we say unexplained, I really mean that we can't put our finger on it. We don't know at what point of time it was caused. We don't have enough research to give us this information. We do have enough information to tell us that in about 60% of the cases it's inherited or genetic and passed down in the family. That doesn't mean to say that the mother has to pass it down to her daughter and in a direct genealogy, but that an uncle may have had it or an aunt may have had it when you look at family history. The other 35 to 40% were what we call acquired dyslexics. These were children who had difficulty with the same kinds of symptoms, reading, writing, spelling, but the causes for their dyslexia were not genetic but were environmental. These included seizures, febrile convulsions, medication for febrile convulsions, head injuries, even medication for asthma. And a lot of research is now being done in the area of attention deficit disorder, which is also an area of a learning disability where children are very hyperactive. And a lot of the causes are now being looked into, including high levels of lead, the additives and flavorings in foods that we now see. These are also causes for these problems. The end result of both is more or less the same. That is, the child has difficulty with reading or spelling or writing. Now, sometimes the child can read but has trouble with spelling and maths alone. He may be able to read quite fluently, and so his difficulty gets overlooked in the classroom quite a bit, and all he shows up in his classroom work is spelling mistakes. And so the teacher tends to think that he's being careless or lazy or stupid and is just not trying hard enough. If you looked at reports of dyslexics, the most common teacher comment is, can try harder, should try harder, could do better. And the reason, it's really amazing, the reason being that the teacher knows that here's this child who's quite bright, and she knows within her that he's got something, or she has got something in him that is convincing her that he can do better. So she's not wrong there. But the fact is that the child is not doing as well as he should be. And that's where we talk about the gap. Now, somebody today also asked me, well then what's the next step? We now know that this child has this difficulty, well what do we do? We thought out a lot of strategies when we were dealing with this topic, and my own feeling was that when I looked at classrooms from the time that I went to school and from now, there is a change. In my time we had children from about 25 to 30, and now Delhi schools have 55 to 60. One thing that has not changed is the size of that classroom or the one teacher there. It's exactly the same. It hasn't changed. Now, we generally say in education, when there is a shift like this, we call it a paradigm shift. And when there is a paradigm shift, then there should be other changes in that system as well. But in our system, that did not happen. So that one teacher continued to work with larger numbers of children. What really then happened is that if you take a random population of children, just 100 children off the street, you're going to have some who are not so good. You're going to have an average number who are fairly good, and you're going to have a small percentage who are very good. All right? Now, generally we use the word IQ for it, or intelligence, or whatever you may call it. What that one teacher in the classroom then was doing was teaching to the average in the classroom. The two ends of the continuum, the underachiever and the overachiever, was really being overlooked. They were kind of dropping off at the sides. So then we thought, what do we do? If that is the case, and that was the answer, most teachers said, I can't do anything because I have such large numbers. Our answer to them was, the numbers are not going to decrease. Believe me, they're not going to decrease. Anybody who's a teacher here can only continue to be a teacher if she knows this one fact. If you look at our hospitals today, they're teeming with people. Do the doctors turn around and say, I'm not going to see any more patients? They don't. You look at any walk of life, you look at a bus, there are more people. We just have a lot of population. So the problem lies with the numbers that we have. So if you look at classrooms, we really don't have funds to provide more teachers. Then what was the alternative? Mr. Pandey asked, what can we do for these children? The fact was the one group of children who really got a very bad deal out of this was the dyslexic. He was the one who really required alternative strategies for teaching. And we do now know that with these teaching modifications, they not only do markedly well, but they do radically well. The only reason why I stand here, convinced as I am, is because I work with children with severe disabilities. By severe, I meant maybe a 12-year-old who did not even identify the letters of the alphabet. That's what I would call a severe dyslexia, all right? And within 1.5 to 2 years, that child was able to read and write fluently. I call that radical improvement. And that happened with every child that we saw, provided he was given that help. And that was the driving force that convinced us that we had to do something about this. And when I first started working with the Indian children, it was extremely shocking to me that nobody knew about this. In fact, we were perhaps the first people who started talking about dyslexia, who went to the ministry and said there is something like this and you need to do something about it. We were so convinced about it that I think that conviction carried through wherever we went. And I will admit to you that initially, yes, we did have some resistance from some quarters, because whenever there is change in any system, there will be a resistance. There will always be a resistance. We were ready to face that. But along with that resistance did come the change. And what we found is that large numbers of children who were earlier ignored, traumatized, thrown out of schools, not admitted into schools, were now getting appropriate help. We now have 12 schools in and around Delhi which have fully functioning learning centers, which are providing this kind of help to the children. We are also convinced of the fact that the responsibility for educating these children lies solely with the school. A lot of times I've been told, because we had no option, that parents need to be trained. And we did train the parents, and we do continue to train the parents. But on the other hand, what the parent does for his child is what he does out of love for the child. He doesn't do it because it's his duty for the child. It's not his job to educate the child. It's the job of the teacher or the school to educate the child. And if it so happens that this dyslexic requires a different way of teaching, well, so be it. What makes you think that the parent is better equipped to do this job than the teacher? And if we can provide a system which is a pressure gauge for that overloaded class teacher, well, that works very well too. The teachers are mostly quite relieved to know, okay, I have 4 or 5 children who are not doing so well, who I know can do quite well, but I can't help them. And she is more than willing to get the necessary help for those children. We so far haven't really run into any trouble in that kind of a way that teachers weren't cooperative or were not willing to help. But what we did find was that having the children get help from outside the school wasn't going to work. The reason being that a child who's already spent 6 hours in a school is not mentally or physically ready to come and get outside tutoring. Believe me, if I put you in a school for Greek for 6 hours every day and you did not know Greek, and then I said to you, because you did not learn enough Greek in school, I now insist that you come and get 1 hour extra help in Greek. Do you know what your reaction is going to be? I never want to know a word of Greek in my life. Isn't that right? So what we're really trying to say is that instead of easing pressures off the children, we were increasing the pressures on the children. And so we found that this was a very viable way of helping them out. Now, I've talked about what we did with the schools and how we, really helped them. I would like to spend a little bit of time as to the symptomology of dyslexics. There's still a lot of confusion, I find. Recently, we'd gone to Lucknow for a 2-day seminar, and I thought I had spoken non-stop for about 10 hours, and at the end of 10 hours, one teacher still raised her hand and asked me, what is dyslexia? I hope that if there are any such people in the audience, put it in paper, because then I can be disappointed when I get back and not face it right away. But you see, if you want to talk about what is dyslexia, it's not one thing. It ranges over a continuum from very mild to very severe. The mildest symptoms would be if the child had some memory problems and small problems with spelling. That's the mildest form that I can think of that we see in clinical practice. The severe form would be when a child is completely illiterate. A 9 or 10-year-old who's been to school, who's had appropriate education, has a sufficient cultural background or socioeconomic background and still has failed to learn how to read or write. That's what we call complete illiteracy. That's, the severity. And we do see some of those. A lot of times we see children like that. The medium types would be the normal child who would, in the classroom, be unable to read, has a lot of difficulty with reading, has a lot of spelling mistakes in his written work, and is really not able to put what he knows on paper. So the teacher says, I ask him questions, he raises his hand and he answers all the questions, and yet when he has to write it down, he doesn't do it. That's a common complaint of most people in this field. So that's the moderate kind of average dyslexic that you're going to see. Now when we talk about intelligence, we keep harping on this, they're very intelligent and that they are above intelligence. I just like to clarify this a little bit. If I was to take 100 children off the street, as I told you earlier, you're going to have a random sample of those children, some with below average, some with average, and some above average. Now, if we take a sample of dyslexics too, we see the same kind of sample. That means that you will have dyslexics who are below average, the majority who are average, and some who are above average. Now, as Mr. Pandey already said to you that Einstein and Agatha Christie, Akbar, they were all dyslexic. It might come to a point where people say, I want to be dyslexic. In other words, you've got all the talents, or you've got all the backing for special qualifications. Actually, neurologically speaking, it is true. It is believed that if it is genetic, then the brain, for some reason, in your language area, doesn't develop as well as it should be. So during that development, human nature or development balances that by developing the other part of the brain. So what we see in a lot of dyslexic are very good spatial ability, a lot of them very good with mechanical things, a lot of them. A lot of them are very good with sports. They make excellent sportsmen. And a lot of them make very good actors because they act a lot. But what really happens is that human nature has a way of balancing things. So if you have a deficit, if you want to use that word, in one particular area, then you sort of stabilize it by making it up for in another area. Research also tells us that siblings sometimes of dyslexics are very high achievers. Sisters of dyslexics sometimes become very high achievers. So it's very confusing to teachers to see one child who's a dyslexic and one who is a very high overachiever. It's nature's way of balancing things. And one of the first people who had done work with dyslexia was Orton. And I don't know if a lot of you have heard of him, but he was a neurologist who in the 1920s first reported the case and called it word blindness. And he found that there are a lot of patients whom he had who just couldn't see the word. He thought they couldn't see it. Later on, he realized that they couldn't read. And a lot of the research that he had done in the 1920s is as valid today as it was 70 years ago. And I'd like to share some of his findings with you very quickly. He said that visual perception was normal. That means that they could see pretty all right. It was just that when they had to process that information, they had difficulty. So therefore, in the classroom, these children are going to have trouble copying from the blackboard. They would have trouble remembering visual information and converting it into visual memory. There's nothing wrong with their eyes. It was their perception or their processing which was affected. He said that there was ambidexterity in a large number of dyslexics. In other words, they had confusion between the left and the right, or they were equally adept at using the left and the right hand. They did not show any strong preference for one hand. There was a relationship of stuttering to dyslexia. Large numbers of people who stutter are often dyslexic. He said that there was a high frequency of left-handedness in dyslexics and in their families. He said that the frequency of slowness in the acquisition of spoken speech. Those children who are late in acquiring speech often have signs of dyslexia. Those children who are slow in acquiring walking milestones have difficulties which have to do with motor skills. So they would show evidence as a form of dyslexia where they have trouble with writing, they have trouble with fine motor skills and gross motor skills. These are the typical clumsy children. He also said that there were children in whom there were difficulties in learning to read, and there were some who did know how to read but who spelled very badly. Now, one of the most important things that he said at that time, and it really holds good true, I've been told this a lot of times as a psychologist, yes, all that you're saying is quite all right, but what's really the problem with this child is that he's got emotional problems. He's very badly behaved, he has lack of concentration, he's inattentive, and he disturbs all the other children, he's very aggressive on the playground, all these kinds of things. So they really didn't want to talk about the academic things, they wanted to talk about the emotional problems or the behavior problems. And it seemed to me as though they were saying, well, if we can deal with this, then the others will disappear. And therefore, a lot of the schools mushroomed with counselors who brought in 6-year-old children and 7-year-old children and counseled them on their bad behavior. Now, I know a lot of you are laughing because I found that strange too. At that particular time, I had a 7-year-old daughter who was quite badly behaved too, and she was not dyslexic. And I just thought to myself, how can a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old start having emotional problems or psychological problems? These are big words for children. I didn't believe it even for 1 minute. I hadn't read any research on it or hadn't read literature, but intuitively I just didn't believe it. The reason was that children, after seeing what happens, are very resilient. I'd seen children who'd been in traumatic accidents, who'd lost parents, who'd seen death of grandparents, and next day they were as bubbly as ever. It was as if nothing had happened. They're very resilient, they're strong little, like rubber balls, they bounce right back. So what made you think that they had psychological or emotional impairments? And actually, when we started working with the children in the Learning Center, we found that when we helped them with academics, the emotional problems disappeared. That was the first sign to us that the system that we were using was working. The second sign was that the emotional problems not only decreased, but eventually, when they became mainstream, the term that we use when children no longer require special help, the emotional problems disappeared completely. Now, what we were really saying is that the emotional problems and the academic problems were interrelated, each not causing the other. Orton, when he did his first work, had said that the emotional disturbance is necessarily the result of the impact of the disorder on the child, not the result, but that it can be the direct result of changes in the brain. Now this is a bit complicated to understand, but I'd just like to explain this. What he said was that those catalysts or causes which cause the changes in the brain, which eventually cause the dyslexia, were also the catalytic agents for causing emotional changes in the brain. We now know that there are chemical processes or chemical substances which control emotional behavior, and he said that it was a two-pronged effect that was causing this. In other words, each was not causing the other. And when we worked with the children, it seemed as if that catalyst was disappearing. So each stabilized. The reason I'm saying this to you because it's a very commonly held belief that emotional problems exist in children. They do. I'm not saying that they don't, but I don't think that we should allow 6 or 7-year-old children to be considered psychologically impaired. They're not. They only have trouble with academics. And I love this story, if I was to ask you to sit in a Greek class and you were dyslexic because you don't know Greek at all, every day of your life, 300 days of the year, I can tell you that you're going to be the most badly behaved adults I ever knew. Is that right? Because It's very, very frustrating for dyslexics to sit in a classroom and not be able to do a lot of things. Not only that, the teachers are giving them a lot of negativism, not understanding their problem, and they really can't cope with this kind of negativism which they're getting from school, they're getting from home, and in fact all around them. Children too, peers, they can be really cruel, they can be really mean too. Now, when Orton did his work, if you remember, it was 1920s, all of what he was saying holds true even today. All of that, all of what he had said. Now, when I say that dyslexics have all these symptoms or they have these difficulties, they're all listed in the literature that has been given to you. So I'm not going to enumerate them, but you know that they often reverse letters, often reverse words. Even an adult dyslexic, I have a very good friend, I have to always ask her to repeat the phone number because it's always reversed. You know, 67 and she'll say 76. On the flight here to Lucknow, it was 815 and she said 185 is ready to go. So you might find that in a lot of people, and these are the remnant signs that they do have. But one thing that we learned after working with them, and you know, it's very easy for people to stress on all the negative stuff, that they're bad at this and they're bad at that and they're no good. But they do have a lot of strengths too. And if we started looking at that, we perhaps might do better for these children. They have advantages to the predisposition to dyslexia. Now, you might say that sounds a bit strange. What advantages could they have? Now, we see that a lot of dyslexics have very high talents in a lot of areas, like art, like music, like sports, like I already mentioned to you. The only thing is that the overriding factor in our education system seems to be academics and how well they do in the classroom, how much they achieve in an examination. We tend not to think of the other areas as equally important. And if that was the case, we wouldn't be using the name of Einstein or all the other great people before us who were dyslexic. We have lost over the years the fine feeling for people as humans who have other qualities as well. And some time back, I had attended a UNESCO conference which was held by NCERT, and they've been talking a lot about integration. I'm sure all of you will hear about it some point or the other. Now, integration means that, in a normal classroom, you accommodate all children with all kinds of disabilities, whether it's physical handicapped or moderate, retardation or whatever. Now, they're advocating that concept and they're including learning disabilities or dyslexia in that. What they didn't tell us at that point was that in those countries where they tried it, it failed. The Australians who came to visit us said it didn't work. The only time it worked was if you had physical handicap or you had a visual impairment. In that case, they had to give them an aid in the classroom and then it was fine. It works very well for them because there shouldn't be special schools for those children. But for the children who have dyslexia, it doesn't work because they do require what we call individualized teaching methods. They require an individualized, structured, pre-planned, multi-sensory technique. And when I told them about it, it was like, well, what you're saying is all right, but we really don't believe you. And one thing that really got me thinking about that was that when we look at Indian tradition, we always hear of the Guru Shishya, don't we? It's what was education for Indian culture was that. And now we say, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work and it's no good. What we talk about remedial education is that it is teacher and the student on a one-to-one where the teacher says, I understand what your problem is and I'm willing to help you in whatever way I can. When we said this to NCERT, they didn't like it very much because we're not liked very much when we say this, because the reason they said this to us was we tried it in our countries and it's very expensive. We don't believe that more funds should be put into teacher education. And I, at least, and we don't hold that view because we very strongly advocate the fact that our teachers require more funding. Does anybody here agree that we have enough funds in our schools? Does anybody here agree that teachers professionally are at par with other professions? I, for one, don't agree with it at all. And until we reach that caliber or that category of professionalism, we can keep talking about education, nothing is going to happen. So we fought them on this grounds by saying we don't want to decrease funds. We're talking about decreasing funds. We want to increase funds. If you come and say this to us, the Ministry and Education is going to say, cut the funds. They're talking about funds basically. They're talking about developing countries who don't have funds. But on the other hand, we're talking about literacy. We're talking about educating our people. So the method that we were advocating is not new to us. It's very old, it's traditional, and it works. And I think we have to start reverting back to some of what we used to do without being totally invaded by what is happening in European and Western countries. Now, I don't know for how long I've been given to talk, but I did not want to spend too much time on talking about what is dyslexia because it's already there. But I would like to end with a couple of things that I had on my mind. One was that I do believe that there should be no school in India which rejects a child because he has a problem. I do believe that every school should give equal opportunities or equal rights to every child, no matter who that child may be. And the biggest problem we had was that even in some of the schools where we started learning centers and they had appropriate teachers or help, they would not admit children once they knew they were dyslexic. So we started fighting with them and say, okay, keep a percentage of your admission for these children. What we are trying to say here is that if that child is different, you made him different. And it is therefore your responsibility or society's responsibility to deal with it. How can you reject a child for no fault of his? And knowing now that you have educational technology to help him, it is your moral duty to do so. I would like to end on a quote that I find very, it expresses what we've been trying to say. The reason why I came full circle from teaching, working with juvenile offenders to children with dyslexia was I thought that they were both captives. They were both captives of society and who needed to be free. William Blake's words, which have been altered a little bit, I'd like to quote. Bring me my bow of burning gold, bring me my arrows of desire, bring me my spear, O clouds unfold, bring me my chariot of fire. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built a special school in India's green and pleasant land. And it is this society, Madras Dyslexia Association, that has provided all of us with somewhere to go in that chariot of fire, and with something to do with that bow, that spear, and that sword. The battle for literacy is far from won, and there are still countless captives to be freed. Thank you.
I didn't know whether to take it as a compliment or as an insult.
It's definitely a compliment.
But the reason why they chose to let me introduce myself is because I am a dyslexic. And I am going to be talking to you from a dyslexic's point of view. It's very, very difficult being a dyslexic when you're young. But as you grow older, it's lots of fun. It's lots of fun because, I don't know, I think it's fun in the sense that I get up in the morning and then I'm reading a newspaper. And of course on the street, I reverse. So there's it. Giri jumped off the bus. He was hurt very badly. And I thought, oh my God, our president's been hurt because Giri was president then. I thought, oh my God, what was he doing? pass anyway. That's my place for president. And then I read it again, and it's not Giri, it's the girl who jumped off the bus. Another very amusing incident was when I read a Rani killing 10 people. And into my mind flashed this image of Queen Victoria sitting on 10 hapless victims and killing them all. It was the rain that killed 10 people. So we have to laugh about it, because if I didn't laugh about it, I'd only cry about it. Imagine, I was 30 years old and I'm reading like this. Gosh, it's terrible. You know, Dr. Sogi has told you a lot about dyslexia, so I don't think there's much that I can add to that, because it was really very complete what she put across to you. But that's only, I have just this much to add, that you know, we forget that these children are very, very intelligent, and so the problems that they have really harm them, because they have the intelligence to know that they are not stupid. They have the intelligence to know that there's something wrong with them. And by not giving them the appropriate help, we really are harming them. I was not diagnosed at all as being a dyslexic. And my years in school were so bad that I never went to college. When I finished school, I said, oh my God, this is it. There's no way anyone is dragging me to college. I said, there's no way. I will just not go. So of course, the next best thing that my parents did was get me married to a batchmate of Mr. Panda's. Yes. Now my husband is a very, very literate person. He did his BA, his MA, and then he joined the IAS. When he did his BA, he passed with the first rank in the state. For his MA, he got the second rank. For his IAS, he got very, very high marks. And then he got me as a wife. What did he do wrong? Well, the thing is that any major decision in the house, he doesn't take it alone, because he says he doesn't have that kind of capacity to make that kind of decision. And he says, you're so good at it. Let it be your decision. And I find that not just my husband, but a lot of our friends, and most of them are IAS officers. All come to me for advice. Be it a posting or be it which school the child is go to, whatever. They come to me for advice, and I feel so great about it. You know, I feel so good, so good. Here's this person who, for 13 years, it took me 13 years to finish school. I think longer than that. I think for 14 years to finish school, because I've skipped back so many times. Anyway, it didn't do any good. Keeping back children, you know, detention really doesn't do any good, because it's not that they don't know what the subject is. They know what the subject is. I mean, you ask a child, she knows her answers. It's just she can't reproduce it. And under pressure, definitely not. She's just not going to do that. So I knew my answers, and but it wasn't satisfactory enough when I put it down on paper. And then they give you some time limit to finish your question paper. Definitely not. I'm not going to finish in my time limit at all. So I never did pass my exams. I did pass a few, but very difficult. And they get me back, and what happened when they get me back was, I knew the textbook by heart. So when the teacher's teaching, I was busy pulling the girl's hair in front or kicking the girl, beside me, really disrupting the class. And that's what you're going to have. That's what you're going to find. That if you keep these children back, these children are going to just be the bad elements of the class. And you could get a very bad name. They're not all that bad. We just misunderstood. So what happens when you go on keeping this child back is that in the end the child gives up. Because even after studying, you're not going to achieve, you're not going to pass. So what's the point in studying? So you just give up. Now at some point, I too gave up. I feel there's no point in studying because what's the point? I work hours on my notes. I wasn't going to get the passing grade, so why should I bother? I just paid attention in class, and that was it. Finally, when I did get to do the board exam, it's quite old, but when I did get to do my board exam, I did so well. Surprised myself that I passed that with such good marks. So I kept wondering, was it my teachers or was it me? Well, I get very nervous here. I have to talk and then I forget everything that I had to say. Before I come here, I can say, oh, I've got so much to tell them. Then when I come and stand here, I forget. It's terrible. I think Dr. Sodhi has already told you that it's not an illness. And I really have to repeat that. It's not an illness. You overcome dyslexia, but it never goes away. It's there with you for life. It's like your shadow. Never goes. I went through a lot of trauma in my childhood, and I'm going through a lot of trauma now because I have a child who's dyslexic. If I can get through this without crying, that would be great. It's terrible. I can't get help for her. Where do I go? We are doing so much. Educare is doing so much. Madras Dyslexia Association is doing so much. There's a child reach in Bombay that is doing so much. But it is not enough. Whatever our contribution, it is just not enough. It is until every single person, every single child can come out of school with a great personality and with a lot of confidence and with getting appropriate education that we can say we are a civilized society. I'm going to misquote, who's that again? Yeah, Kennedy. Ask not what the dyslexic child can do for you, but what you can do for the dyslexic child.
And she tells us, how to not to pity yourself, but to go ahead and enjoy yourself in life. Thank you. Dr. Sodhi will answer a few questions.
I feel compelled to answer them right now. I'll read out what they said first of all. I also forgot to answer what Mr. Pandey had put to me, which was how can the government help? One of the most important things, if with your permission I'd like to say, is the first step would be to set up a special advisory committee on special education, because that's the first step. You can make all sorts of decisions, but unless you have a committee, that's how we work in this government and that's how we work in this country, consisting of voluntary organizations like the Madras Dyslexia Association, parents, as well as government representatives, that would be a first step as to what can you do next. Because unless you have that, you're not going to move ahead. I know from attending the international conferences that all those countries which have made a beginning, including Malaysia and Philippines, started by having an advisory committee. I was told by the government of India that we already have an advisory committee, which is NCERT. You all know what that is. I don't agree there because I think that the voluntary bodies need representation, and now that you have large numbers of voluntary organizations which are dealing with mainstream education, not special schools. Here we're not talking about special schools. This has to be a first step. I agree also with him that funds is not the only answer. The central government has been telling us that we have funds. Here it is. Every time I go to see them, they said, when are you taking funds from us? So it's not funds which is the problem. We need other kinds of assistance. And one of the first things that I think is very important is they can help you with media and awareness. You see, there's just that much you can do as a voluntary organization, but the government can help with the media and awareness. You know, regular programs on your television, for example, which actually show teachers how to work with these children. For one thing, that's one example. Setting up a teacher training institute. There is no university, there is no institution of education which provides a specialized training to a teacher that she can go out and say, I am ready to teach a dyslexic. I know that 5 or 6 universities do give you some kind of certificate and diplomas in special education. There is a university in Bombay also which does that. But it is overall, it teaches you how to deal with spastics and other kinds of handicaps. It does not tell you how to work with mainstream school situations and with children with dyslexia there. I mean, these are a couple of things that I would like to suggest because we face problems here. The second thing is that it is a matter of pride to us now that we can stand up and say that we are at par with other countries with the level of knowledge that we now have in this field. If a parent comes to me and says, do you think I should take my child for diagnosis to America or Australia? The answer is always no, because we are very confident of saying we can provide all the help you need here. If they want to say, do you have enough teaching expertise? We do. It's not enough, but we do have it, and we are at par with other countries. It's a matter of national shame to have to say to somebody, we don't have it, and you have to go abroad for this. So the teacher training is very important. Second thing is, we don't have enough literature. All the books that we have are from other countries. And we have now worked, he'd asked for some relevant literature. We have worked on it and we have some information now. But we require funding for that. The government should also be able to function as a nodal center for giving this information. If anybody requires this information, it should be available to them in terms of materials or information or books or whatever you want to call it. Every library should keep some books on this topic at least. There are, of course, many other areas that the government can help out with, and each state or each center has their own ways of working it out. I would also say that as a matter of policy, every school should include the teaching of dyslexics. Abroad they have legislation for it. America has PL 94-142, you've heard of it. That means that if your child is diagnosed dyslexic, then he must receive appropriate help by law. By law, you can go to the school and say, my child has to get appropriate help. In England, they have similar legislation. If the government school does not have funds for it or doesn't have facilities for it, they will fund that child to go to a private school where he gets this kind of help. Now, we haven't reached that stage, but I hope we will. And as far as there are many questions here for examination interventions, it's very necessary. Now, by interventions we mean, can dyslexics record their answers on tape? I think we're very far from it, but there's no harm talking about it. Because if we don't talk about it, we're not going to move to it. And secondly, I also feel that with computer technology, maybe 50 years from now, we won't even need to know how to write. Then why not put the child, with that kind of technology right away? There's no harm. Now, the other adaptations are, of course, length of time, increasing the time, and all those other kinds of things which have to be worked out using models which have been tried out before. Not a mix and match of, maybe it worked in America and maybe it worked. We have to see what's good for us too. We have to see how we can consolidate all that information. We're lucky in one way. If we are starting 70 years too late, you see other countries had all the 70 years ago, we now can at least sit back and just use that information. They've done a trial and error. We are lucky enough to say we have ready-made information. So in that sense, there's always a positive side to it. So we need to look at it and work it out for ourselves. All of what they've done is not going to be good for us. Some of it may be good for us, which we need to now adapt. But yes, certainly legislation has to be worked out. If they made adaptations, like you said, for this physical handicap, then why not for this category, which is, as we said again and again, 10%. And by 10%, when I say 10%, it means 10% in a normal school. But I can also tell you that large numbers are going to schools for children with mental handicap because they have been diagnosed as such. And these are children with attention deficit disorder. These are children on the borderline dyslexics. Large numbers are going there. And from our own clinical practice, we are seeing sometimes even more than 10%. If there is some linking with malnutrition and socioeconomic background, then those schools are going to have higher representatives. Here we're talking about more elite schools. So therefore the necessity of providing interventions becomes even more important. When the government is talking about dropout rate, I don't know whether they're looking at this fact that the dropout rate is linked to dyslexia. 80% of adult illiterates as a worldwide figure are dyslexic. So if we looked at all those figures, it's quite frightening really. But the only thing is that it helps us to say that, okay, something needs to be done. I'm going to just randomly pick out a couple. So I hope the rest of you won't mind, because I don't know if you have time for all the answers. The rest we'll try to post to you. Is that all right? Okay. Now, one of the questions is that having a special education center is difficult. It's not difficult. It's very easy really. If there's a will to do more for children, then it's not difficult at all. Now, it says, I would like to insist that educational institutions should limit the number of children in each class. I wish we could say this, but it's not possible. The other thing is that what we've already said, that if we start learning centers and we are able to provide one-to-one for the children who need it, you see most children, I'm surprised to tell you, and it surprises me too. My son goes to school with 60 children and he learns. Believe me, he's an average student. In other words, average children do learn in the way that we work. In one of the schools that we visited today, the principal was showing me the classroom where the chairs were in a straight line. And she said, well, generally they do like to work in a cooperative method and they do like to use group techniques. When you have large classrooms, group techniques don't work because the room becomes very noisy. And our old methods were really quite good. If 60 children can sit in a classroom and learn, I think we must be doing lots of things correctly. I've been in a system where I have 15 children and 10 of them don't learn. It's not an exaggeration, it's true. Because they're all over the classroom, they're allowed to do whatever they feel like. So would you consider that method good, or do you think our system is good? We can function with large classrooms, with certain adaptations, but again I'm going to say this, those children who are having difficulty need to be addressed differently. Could laziness and dyslexia be interlinked? Now generally dyslexics are told that they are lazy. And the only answer that I have to this is that when Mrs. Ramachandran first met me, her daughter and my daughter were best friends. And I am a really bad mother because I never spend time with my daughter, and my daughter does quite well in the classroom. In other words, I could be spending from 5 to 10 minutes a day. And Mrs. Ramachandran was spending up to 3 to 4 hours with her child. And the teacher would come up and say, Mrs. Ramachandran, you are a very bad mother. Your child is so lazy. I don't have any other answer for this. And Mrs. Sodhi, you're such a good mother. Your daughter does so well in class. All right. How are the centers in school organized in terms of time? Does this child spend all school time with individual learning? No, they don't require the entire time. They require mostly, even if they're very severely dyslexic, 1 and the maximum 2 hours a day, 3 days a week or 4 days a week, that's all. If they got 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, but then you're going to consider the fact that it may be for a longer period of time, but then you're not going to worry about it. You see, if you were a parent and you were to go for private tutoring for 5 years for 1 hour every day, I would like to see how many parents would continue. But if I said to you, you are going to get help for your child in a school for 5 years maybe, and it's got nothing to do with you because it's going to happen in school, you wouldn't bother, would you? So the time is generally recommended is not more than that. Dyslexics don't need that. They can function quite well even when the teacher is explaining, science or social studies. They understand perfectly well. It's when they have to write. And once their abilities come up to par, then they can cope with the written work as well. So there's no problem with that. There are 2-3 questions on the linking of intelligence again. Now, as I've already said to you, you will have some dyslexics who are on the lower scale, some who are average, and some who are with higher intelligence. So there's no hard and fast criteria that all dyslexics are above average or all dyslexics are below average. It's not like that. Just like any other child, it's the same kind of random sampling. The profile will remain the same. Now, a special arrangement for answering orally by such children. Now, that is true. Some of the schools in Delhi which have got programs now and started understanding it, what they do is that on the objective paper, they allow the child to answer all right, and they do not cut marks if the spelling is incorrect. So if the child has written carbohydrates and spelled it incorrectly, they give the full marks. And the subjective type of questions that they have, they will call the child, knowing if they know that he's dyslexic and is going for help, and ask that same examination question orally. If that child answers orally, what is expected on paper, they are marked accordingly. Now, this is not going to continue in the, throughout the entire school life, but until such time as he is getting help. So maybe for a year or maybe the next year that is done. One other thing Mrs. Ramachandran already mentioned, it's not recommended that dyslexics be retained, for the simple reason that they should be with children of their own age. I have no other answer for this. They must be with children of their own age. If you retain them for 2 years, a 9-year-old then has to be with 7-year-old children, which is very regressive for them. Now, one question. Nowadays, children start using fingers for writing at the age of 3 years. And according to medical experts, they should use fingers at the age of 5 years. So, this is the cause for children getting dyslexia. Now, you see, the thing is that you should not be using fingers for actual written tasks at the age of 3. That we all now know. We can have them do certain other finger dexterity, what we call finger dexterity tasks, which develop the ability to use our fingers. Eventually then we can develop handwriting skills. But it doesn't mean that we don't teach them how to use our fingers. We do teach them how to use our fingers. But yes, you do not ask a 3-year-old to start writing a lot. And I will share with you that I do find a certain discrepancy in what your schools here are doing and what we are doing in the north. I saw the work of a class 1 child and I was pretty amazed because there were long sentences, and actually a class 1 child shouldn't be asked to do more than 1 word kind of work, or lots more oral work. When we ask children to do work which they are incapable of doing developmentally, we are depriving them of other skills. We are depriving them of other information, personality building, or other kinds of skills. So I think you need to be aware of that here as well, because it was surprising to me. You should certainly not ask a 3-year-old to write with a pencil. And as far as examination papers are concerned, yes, they require long answers. We used to have one textbook for CBSE. I did senior Cambridge, we had one textbook, and I saw my daughter, who's just done the 10th board, had 4 reference books for one subject. I don't think she had even looked at her textbook. You know, that's the way the education system has come, and I don't know how it's become like that, but it has become a test of memory. And one thing about memory, which I'd like to share with you, is it very much functions like the electric circuit in your house. The minute it gets overloaded, it just blows a fuse. It also has a capacity, a certain capacity which it can accept. And when you start overloading, we use the word overloading, children just switch off. They just switch off and they don't want to deal with it. So when we overload our system, we really bring a lot of harm to children. Somewhere along the line, someone will have to stop and say, why are we doing this? If a preschool child, if the child is taught with all his senses and with play, he will not be dyslexic in future years. You see, the predisposition for dyslexia is there at birth if it's inherited, which is the case in 60% of the cases. If it's very mild and you're using what I understand from this multi-sensory method, that means all your senses at the same time, then you are going to ameliorate it to a large extent. You may not be able to prevent it completely. But if, on the other hand, that same child with very mild problems is put into a system where he's allowed to, he's told to use his senses beyond his capacity, then that mild condition becomes severe. That's all I can say about this. It's not clear whether the cause for dyslexia is organic or psychological or social. We now do believe that it is neurological. We now know from the research which has been done for years on the brain that the condition is neurological. We do not believe that psychologically it can cause. Although when we work with some of the children, we do talk about emotional blocks and family background. But the fact is that there is a neurological condition prevalent, and certain factors may trigger it off to a large extent. But the neurological condition is very much present. Does a child become dyslexic if he had terrorizing and strict parents and relatives? And is it necessary that they should go through academic achievement? Now, terrorizing and strict parents are not going to help the child at all, nor are terrorizing and strict teachers. The thing is, the child needs a very soft, gentle approach. We sometimes even forget that a 6-year-old is just a baby. I've seen teachers who get so mad and so angry with 6-year-olds, and they just forget that they're just small little children, just small little babies. You can't be strict with them. And I think the reason why we get strict is that our expectations are very high. And when the expectation becomes very high, we just can't cope with the failure. It doesn't cause the dyslexia though. See, dyslexia is a neurological condition caused at birth. A lot of research is telling us that it's even prenatal development which is causing it. In the cases where it's acquired, of course we know that there are lesions in the brain and injury has occurred. But the terrorizing isn't going to help the child at all, nor is the terrorizing in the school. Examination fever got to do with such disorders? No. The examination fever doesn't cause such disorders because children who are already sort of diffident or not confident, they do have more what we call fever for examinations than other children. It seems as though they can't hold that much information, they're stressed at examination time. It's not the other way around. But yes, if we release tension for them and make it less stressful, they're certainly going to do better. I know that even very normal children, if we can relax them before examination time, and we take a few minutes just to relax them, they do much better. Some of the questions which are detailed I'll answer later. Is there a distinct difference between slow learners and dyslexics? Yes, definitely yes. You see, slow learners are slow on all areas of development or performance, if you want to call it. The other distinct difference is that mostly dyslexics do not have difficulty with comprehension or understanding or what we call intelligent behavior. If I read out a passage to a child, he understands it and can comprehend it. A slow learner takes a lot more time understanding what is in that passage. There is a difference. They are also slow in all other areas of functions or performance. If you look at IQ, all slow learners would categorize under 90 IQ levels. Whereas, as you know, dyslexics sometimes are very, very bright. There is a lot of papers that I'm seeing to do with IQ. My own suggestion to you is forget about it. Don't worry too much about it, because it's not so important. You know, if you just consider the child for what he is and as he is, and think that with certain things you can help him out, that's all right. Don't worry too much. If every one of you was told, I want to know how intelligent you are, and then only I want to deal with you, I don't think we're going to like it either. If I put every one of you through an IQ test and said, I'm going to rate you, I don't think that's fair. I don't think we need to know. These are all, again, man-made. Even though I'm a psychologist, I refrain from using intelligence tests as far as possible. So, you know, I think there's a lot of concern or talk about IQ. My own suggestion is forget about it. It doesn't really matter. If we are equating reading failure with IQ, then you're probably right, because our society rates reading failure with IQ. But what I'm saying to you is, be concerned about the reading failure and not about the IQ. Because the more reading a child does, the better he gets, no matter what his IQ is. You know, it's like going for tennis. If I go every day for tennis, I may not become world champion, but I'll learn how to play tennis. It's the same thing with reading and writing. It's not something which is so bad or so difficult or so impossible that the child can't learn it. All right, correcting bad handwriting of a 14-year-old, that's a bit difficult. And my suggestion to this person is put him onto a typewriter or computer. Don't worry, I have terrible handwriting myself, and ever since I acquired an electronic typewriter, I do very well. So, whether remedial methods can be utilized in Tamil medium classes? Certainly they can. Unfortunately, as yet, we don't have materials which have been translated into Tamil. But I would like to share with you one thing, is that when they developed this research material for dyslexics, or the workbooks, or the method, they found that these methods were equally useful when they were teaching a second language. For example, teachers of French or Spanish or other languages used a method what we call communication. Isn't that how we teach another language? A second or a third language, I don't mean a first language. Is we read out a story, we talk about it, we give them vocabulary, and we talk about comprehension passage. That's how we teach it. But if they taught that second language in the way that we teach dyslexics, that means using a phonics approach, they learned it much quicker. So even those children who have to learn Tamil will certainly learn it much better if these methods are used. And as soon as you can, those of you amongst you who can help with this work, I'm sure the Dyslexia Association will certainly welcome that. If anybody here requires diagnosis, I can only say to you that you have very well qualified people with the Dyslexia Association who will help you out as far as possible. And there are one or two who have written detailed case histories. I'd like to deal with it in a more detailed way. we find even lower KG teachers or primary teachers have dyslexia. Alright, it's 1 out of 10. So if I count up to 1 to 10, one of you is going to have this problem too. We all have a certain amount of, nobody can stand here and say I'm perfect, and there's nothing that I don't have wrong. A lot of the best teachers in the world for dyslexics are dyslexic. And that's a fact, because when they found that they, had trouble, then the children were having trouble, they devised ways and means of teaching these children. So really there's not a problem at all. I've tried to answer as many of these as possible. Some of the detailed ones I'll certainly try to respond on a personal level. And thank you very much for listening.
The fact that we've generated so many questions means we've taken a big step towards awareness. I'd like to ask the Secretary of the Association, Mr. Chandrasekhar, to tell with a vote of thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Madras Dyslexia Association, I would like to express our sincere thanks to Dr. Sunita Soli, who so readily responded to our invitation. As a matter of fact, we couldn't get this hall on 30th, on which we wanted it, so she even preponed her ticket and made it possible. Our special thanks to Mrs. Malika Ramchandran, who made this talk a little lively. Otherwise, we were all feeling a little depressed about the whole subject. On behalf of the association, we thank Mr. Ramesh Chandra Panda for extending his hand from the government, without whose support none of these efforts can be really successful. I wish to thank all the teachers, educationists and parents who have come here in such a large gathering in spite of the fact that this is the examination period. I also wish to thank all those others who have come here who care for the children, and the various organizations who have given us support from within and from outside to make this evening a success. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, just one last word. I'm sorry I'm barging at the last one. Mr. Panda was kind enough to mention my name twice and Mrs. Srinivasan's name twice for having organized this and doing wonderful work. I think I owe something more to others. We have a wonderful committee, especially Mr. Chandrasekhar, who's a live wire behind this. I only happen to be the president and do what he tells me. So we have a wonderful committee who's working with all their might, no time spare. Actually, we are always 15 minutes early to all our meetings. So you know the type of members we have in the committee. I think I owe this to the committee.